a shower, and the neighborhood put it on for us shortly after we were married, and they brought the gifts that usually come with a shower, sheets and blankets and dishes and pots and pans and so forth. And in Wayland, there was a place where people brought in household things that they wanted to sell. And then they auctioned them off. When Floyd could get away, we'd go to that. We got table and chairs and a couch and lamps and things that we needed to set up housekeeping. School was going well. In February, we had a program for Lincoln's birthday. We put on a play. Harold Welch and Eva Saxon were 8th grade students. I enjoyed them. And they acted out the parts about Lincoln, and the other children were other members of the play. It was a fun time. We didn't have the neighbors in or anything. It was just for the school people. Arbor Day, we planted a tree. We didn't need a tree because the school was surrounded by woods. But that was the thing to do on Arbor Day. The water came from a spring across the road. The bigger boys took turns going to get a pail of that each day. A dipper was in it, and they brought their own glasses and filled them with a dipper. We played outside any time that the weather permitted. I can remember one game we played a lot was Annie, Annie Over. They were divided up in two sides on each side of the school, and someone would throw the ball over, and then if somebody on the other side of the school caught the ball, they could run around and catch somebody on that other side, and then they'd have to join the side that caught the ball. And this went on, trying to get one side completely captured. We used to have a lot of fun doing that. I played right along with them. School was out in June, and we rented a house in Wallace, New York, on Henderson Street. It was a big thrill to have our own house. It was $8 a month. And that house hasn't been changed at all. When I drive by, I notice many of the houses have been altered or added to, but this is just the same now as it was back in those days. I like to drive by and think about those days when we first lived there. That was an exciting time to us with our new baby, all the new house, or different house at least to us, and we enjoyed it so much. Floyd's sister Eva was married and lived up in Williamson, New York, in the Lake Ontario area. Once in a while they'd come down for a weekend. They had a boy older and another one a little younger than Richard. So we'd go up there for Sunday dinner the weekends that they were down. We used to enjoy that and comparing babies and talking about what they do and how they act and so forth. My father used to have a saying that said, "Every mother's crow is the blackest." And I've thought of that many times. It seemed like our own children are so superior to other children. They're either a little cuter or a little smarter or something. Of course, we never voiced this, but we just thought it. I think that's the way the Lord made us, sort of human nature. Floyd had bought a dump truck, and he worked for the county of Steuben. And that things were going well then. The Depression was still on. Everything was very cheap in the stores. But and the wages, I don't remember what they were that he received, but I know that we got along good. It was sort of a time of prosperity for a little while. Then the county began laying off, and they didn't need his truck anymore. But we heard that if you lived in the town of Fremont, you could get a job with your truck on the Fremont road gang. So we moved up there to a house just inside the town of Fremont on Neals Creek Road. And he worked for the town of Fremont for quite a while. And we had a good time there then. The fall of that year, Jean Elizabeth was born. She was a happy, smiley little girl. Different from Dick. Dick was serious and shy. And it made quite a contrast. She would meet people and smile and put up her hands, and Dick was always shy and wanted to stay by me. Floyd's work on the town of Fremont went well. A house in Haskellville came up for sale. It was $1,500 for a house and barn, and it was on the road that the church is on. We wanted to buy it. We thought we could pay the $300 a year okay, so we moved there in the spring. Jean was 8 months old and Dick was nearly 2, and things went well for the first 2 years. We put in potatoes the third year to make the payment. We had a real good crop. We put in 6 acres, and we dug them and put them in the cellar to make the payment. But that fall, potatoes were 6 cents a bushel. Depression was still on. Roosevelt had been elected in '32 and promised a car in every garage and a chicken in every pot. He had projects that worked later, like WPA and CCC, but they didn't work then. We hauled the potatoes to the dump. There was no sale for them anyway, but it would cost more to grade them and put them in the bags than we could get out of them. So we lost that place. We moved back to Neals Creek up over my parents for a while. Town of Fremont got their own trucks, so Floyd traded the dump truck in for a stake body truck. He trucked potatoes for Bill Holmes and did some trucking for the Hornell Wholesale Groceries. In 1935, he went into business with a man named Logan. They formed the Logan Alderman Trucking Company. They trucked out of New York City and Philadelphia and Baltimore. They bought a big truck and a semi-trailer. They got what was called grandfather rights. That meant that no one else could truck to Hornell out of those particular places. We bought the house that we first lived in there on Neals Creek. It was on sale for $300. We had a house and a barn and 6 acres of land, and we lived in that house until 1951. Dick started school in the Swamp School District where I had taught. They said he was doing so well that they had him take the first and second grade at the same time. He's always regretted that because he said he could do the work academically, but he was not up with the other students because he was always so much younger. And he never recommended that later when he became a teacher. He was very much opposed to putting a child ahead of their years. Jane started there too and did very well. And then I went to Avoca to school. That district voted to close their school and go to the central school in Avoca. There it was different. Dick was still very shy, and he didn't get very good marks. And I went for teacher-student parent consultation, and they said, well, he just doesn't answer the questions. And then I know why he didn't get good marks. And I thought, well, he knows the material, so it isn't important if he doesn't get good marks in these lower grades. When he got to the 5th grade, he did very well because he got over his shyness pretty much, and he liked the teacher, and he did very well. And so did Jean. She continued to do well in the school there in Avoca. In 1937, Carolyn Fern was born. She was a happy little girl, but she was a loner. She was perfectly content to play alone. Dick and Jean did things together all the while and played together and went to school together and all that. And she was left at home alone, and she was happy as could be. She played. She built a playhouse in the lilac bushes out in front of our house. She had broken dishes and some pieces of good dishes and different things that we could give her from the house, and she just had more fun in there. I'd hear her talking away to herself, and she had dolls with her, and of course they were part of her family out there. She used to listen to the radio a lot, and they had there was a boy named Johnny Heaver on there, and that was her friend, Johnny Heaver. She'd talk everything about Johnny Heaver says this, and Johnny Heaver doesn't think that. I don't think Johnny Heaver likes that. She'd go on, and he was just a little imaginary friend that went around with her. It was comical to hear her. She was so happy. It never bothered her that she was all alone. Floyd's business was going good as it had been. We were getting along well. We bought a Ford car. I remember it was, we thought it was very nice. We liked it. And we planned to go to Vermont and visit my relatives there. When I was in the last year, summer before I got married, my Uncle Harry took me up there to visit them. He took somebody every summer. He had 3 weeks vacation. And he would, first summer he took Fern, and next summer he took my mother, and then that summer he took me. And I enjoyed it a lot up there, and I had cousins. The boy was my age, and the girl was older. So I wanted to go up and visit them again. So we went up there in 1938. We got up into the New England area, and that hurricane of 1938 struck. Back in those days, they didn't have the means of forecasting weather like they do now, and there was nothing but now and then a radio. Lots of people didn't have radios even, and television was just in somebody's mind. So we went not knowing what we were getting into. And in the middle of the night, this bad storm started and blew down trees right in front of us. And we finally found a place sort of on a hill to park, and we I had Carolyn and Dick and Jean with me. And Carolyn was a baby with having a bottle then. And so we had stopped and bought a quart of milk. I thought of that so many times. I don't know what we'd done. The older children could munch on goodies that we had packed, but I don't know what she'd have done. But it worked out. I guess the Lord prepared us for it. And we slept in the car. I slept on the front seat, and Floyd slept on the back seat. Jean slept on the window and back, and Dick slept on the floor between the two seats, and I held Carolyn in front of me. So it worked out all right. We stayed there. In the middle of the night, the water began raising around the car a little bit, so Floyd found a higher place to park it. We were very fortunate to be where we were because whole roads were washed out, and rivers overflowed their banks, and it was just a typical hurricane like we hear about today. But we were spared through it, and we got to my aunt's house the next day. My uncle had died the year that I was teaching at Jasper, and so I missed seeing him. But we got there, and Aunt Lena was very friendly and glad to see us and excited about how we told about the way we had come and how we had gotten there safely. My two cousins were both married then, so we visited in their homes. Howard had two children. Catherine didn't have any, but we spent quite a little time with her too. She was real interested in our children. There were many places to go sightseeing up there that we had when I visited with my Uncle Harry, but we didn't do too much because so much of the roads were washed out and the bridges were washed out and so forth. So we spent most of our time right there in their homes. When we got home, we read the account of the hurricane in the papers and realized how very fortunate we were. The Lord had really watched over us. Dick was real interested in reading those accounts in the paper. Later, when he was grown, he was in the Air Force, and his job was to be a meteorologist. And he said he thought his interest in meteorology was sparked through that, reading the accounts of that hurricane and so forth. The next spring, Floyd was home quite a lot of the time because with the two trucks they'd hired a lot more drivers, and so he didn't have to drive so steadily. And he would bring and took his dinner those days when he was home and working in the office in Hornell. One day he brought his dinner pail home and set it on the floor for Carola. He had left a little bit in it each day, like a part of a cookie or a piece of a sandwich. And Carolyn would always get in there and eat that and think that was something special, and we always laughed about it. And one time I was just finishing the supper dishes, and the dinner pail was still on the floor. I said, hand me the dinner pail, and so I can wash that and put it away. And she stood up and looked at me and put her hands on her hips and says, no, I won't. It was such a surprise to us because it was so out of character. She was really a very obedient little girl most of the time. And we didn't know what to do, and I said, well, pick up the dinner pail and give it to me. I need to wash it. I wouldn't have said anything about it and just picked it up myself if I'd known what was going to happen, but I didn't think anything about it. And so I told her again, I've got to have the dinner pail so I can wash it. Hand it to me. And she says, no, I won't. And I said, well, I guess then maybe you'll have to sit in the chair until you want to. And so she got in the chair and she sat. That was quite often the way I punished her because she wasn't a very disobedient little girl, as I said before. So sitting in the chair was usually a place of punishment for her. So she sat there, and we finished up what I could of the dishes, and I went we all went in the other room, but I said, now don't you want to pick up the dinner pail so you can come in the other room with us? And she says, no, I want to sit. So we went in the other room and sat. She did. We were in there quite a long time and began to get time to go to bed. She still was out there. Floyd went out and said, don't you want to come in with us? Don't you want to pick up the dinner pail so you can come in with us? He said, no, I want to sit. So we didn't know what we were going to do. I knew I couldn't very well pick up the dinner pail and say it's okay because this was going to be a time of learning for her. So we sat there and wondered what we were going to do. Finally, in she came, all smiles, and she said, I put it back on the table. And that was the end of it. Nothing ever more was said about it. It was sort of a joke, even around the neighborhood when I told the police about it. It got sort of a joke that people would, something they didn't want to do, they'd say, no, I'm like Carolyn, I want to sit. As I look back on this recording I'm making, I realize I've left out about the most important thing in my life. When we lived in Haskinville, I got to church more than I had any other place we lived. I taught Sunday school so that Dick could be in a class. He was so shy he wouldn't stay in there alone. I took Jean. She sat on the floor, and Dick was happy to stay there. In the church service, the pastor spoke of total dedication. I had always considered myself a Christian. I didn't steal or lie or do any unkind things. Through his message, God spoke to me. I went to the altar and completely dedicated my life. I remember I felt so clean and was so sure of my heavenly home. I was really a Christian then. Now to go back to my story. In the late 30s, there was rumble of war in Europe. Adolf Hitler was head of the German war machine. He had a trained army, and he marched into neighboring countries and took them over. France and England were not so easily won, but World War II began with that. America did not want to get involved in it. There was big controversies about it, those who wanted to and those who did not want to. In the summer of 1940, Floyd Bruce was born. He was a happy, roly-poly little guy. We enjoyed having him around because he was easy to take care of and smiling a lot. Carolyn sort of mothered him. She would talk to him and like a grown-up, and she told him what Johnny Heaver thought, what Johnny Heaver didn't think, and he'd watch her, and she entertained him a lot. Then came Pearl Harbor Day in December of 1941. We all remember President Roosevelt's speech, how this was a day, would go down as a day of infamy, how Japanese had attacked America with no warning. And then things changed completely. Cotton mills were turned over to the government to make cloth for the uniforms for the men. Part plants were turned over to make parts for tanks and other army vehicles. Munition plants were started. All over it was different. And rationing began to be part of our lives. Many things were rationed out. Sugar, meat, gasoline especially. And we each had books for each member of our family. We had 6 in our family, so we were fortunate because I had 6 books, and of course, Bruce didn't eat very much at that time, and so we got along fine with our ration books. In April of 1942, Patricia Ann joined our family. I remember that gave us another ration book. I remember one time I was in a store lined up to go through the cash register, and I had sugar because that was one thing that was hard to come by. You could only have a little bit each week. But I had a bag of sugar and a bag of 4X sugar and a bag of brown sugar because I had been out of all those things and we wanted to make a cake for some reason. So I got all those, and the people in line eyed me like I'd robbed a bank or something. But of course it was all legal, legitimate, because we had 5 children then, and that gave us 7 ration books. About this time, Louis Silsby in Haskinville organized the Boy Scout troop. There were 17 boys in it from all the hills around Haskinville, and it was a good time. Dick and the Pauling boys, who were nephews of Pearl and Gladys that I've mentioned before, and Bob Evans, of course, Ward Silsby, they were all close friends of Dick's, and they all belonged to it. And he was a good scoutmaster. He made them obey all the rules and learn all the different things they had to learn to earn their merit badges. And they had a good time. They met every Monday night. And of course, they walked up together. Nobody had cars gas to waste on cars at that time. And so it was a good time for all of them. That group of boys that I mentioned used to come to our house to play a lot. They'd play baseball mostly. And Jean always played right along with them. She'd take any place where they needed her, one of the bases or one of the field jobs. And she just loved it. She was a good player, and the boys were willing for her to play with them. She had two girlfriends, Eleanor Mattoon and Donna Collins, that came to our house a lot to play too. So when they came, she'd play with them. But she really loved playing the sports games with the boys. I remember Donna Collins' mother told me that Donna said, I just love going to the alderman's house. There's something exciting going on there all the time. Today, Bruce fell down the stairs. I remember, I don't think I thought it was very exciting, but I suppose it was to her. They had no small children in their house, and probably was pretty dull compared to our house. Pat and Bruce played together well. They had a lot of fun together. I remember one day they took off all their clothes and started up the road toward Pauling's. Why, I don't know, but I know that that's a common thing that 2- and 3-year-olds like to do. Dick came down the road on his bicycle and found them. They were just near a big cornfield across from the Pauling's place and next to ours. So he hid one of them in the cornfield and brought the other home. And then he went back and got the other one. He was on his bicycle, so it didn't take him long to do it. But he was thoroughly disgusted with them. I said I know they shouldn't do that, and I was going to punish him for it and try to show him that they must never do it again. But I knew that time would take care of that. I didn't have to worry over it. It wouldn't be only a little while that they wouldn't want to do that. By this time, the war news was beginning to sound very ominous. We didn't know whether Floyd would have to go or not, but they were beginning to take men with families. And so we used to sit and listen to the radio closely. There would be a program that gave the news of the war more than some other programs, and we would listen to see how it was coming. The war was coming. Some of the boys, younger men that worked for Floyd, had received their draft notices and had gone. There were 6 boys from Haskinville area who were drafted and taken into the service. Later, it turned out that only 5 of them came back. 5 of them were killed in action. Such a big number compared to the small area from which they were taken. We watched the mailbox every day for the draft notice because we knew they was getting time that they were taking men with 5 children. We received the draft notice in December of 1944. He was to go for his physical the first part of January. So he went, and he passed in Royal Colors. He was drafted into the Navy. I thought, oh, this is going to be terrible because he never liked the water. When he was a young child, a bunch of boys held him down under the water just to scare him. Of course, not long enough so he hurt him any, but it certainly affected his liking of water after that. He never wanted to go swimming. He never liked to be in a rowboat. He didn't like anything about the water, and I thought, of course, I know some duties that the Navy has is not on a ship, but I couldn't help but think this is real bad for him. But then that whole load of people where it was canceled. He didn't have to go, but he had to go again for another draft notice to go for another physical, and he went. That was the last part of January, and of course he passed again. And this time he was taken in the Army, and date for the date for him to leave was March 14th. So there were many, many things that had to be seen to before he left. Things about the house that had to be fixed, and many little details that had to be taken care of. But one of the big details was the fact that I didn't know how to drive a car. And I had to know how to drive a car. We had to go to Hornell for our groceries and our dental appointments and all the things that the kids needed, things that they needed to go to school for and so forth. So they all agreed that I had to learn to drive the car. Floyd had always been very opposed to women drivers. He sort of thought the whole cause of all the accidents in the world was women drivers. But he agreed that I had to learn to drive, so I got my permit. He was not about to teach me, but he took me up in the field between my mother's house and Pauling's house, and I got in the car, and he waved me on and left. And I went hopping across the field because I didn't know anything about the clutch, of course, and I didn't know anything about anything when I figured I knew how to steer it. But finally I got the hang of how the clutch worked, and I drove around the field a while. Francina Dockstader, a neighbor down the road, was very nice about going with me when I had to go places so I could have a licensed driver with me and still practice driving. And I got along fine. It seemed sort of natural. I didn't have a hard time learning to drive. In fact, I passed my test on the first try. Of course, I think maybe the fact that I had 5 children, my husband was in the service, had some part of it, but he couldn't have passed me if I did anything very, very wrong. The neighbors had a farewell party for him. That was very nice. They brought the food and games, and we played games in the evening, and they gave their good wishes and hope for his safe return and so forth, and it was a nice evening. In the fall of 1944, the REA, Rural Electric Association, was formed in Bath, and they were going to bring electricity up through the Neils Creek area, and we were all excited about that because, of course, we'd had kerosene lights for years, but all around us they had electricity, and we thought it'd be wonderful to have it. But New York State Electric was not to be outdone, so they started from the Hornell area coming up through the different places that didn't have electricity. Haskinville had it for a while. So they came up through to Loon Lake area and down the Neils Creek area, while the REA came up the Neils Creek area. And it was really funny because they were racing. It was a bad winter, deep snow and hard to get through, but they worked so hard and dug holes through that snow and into the ground, racing with each other, and they met right down by below our house by Jim Lockwood's. So the wiring came as far as our house. Floyd had gotten the house ready and wired. Carl Aikens was and his son Lyle were people that did wiring, and they did wiring for all the houses around that were going to now get electricity. My parents got theirs wired, and Paulings got theirs wired, and we did. And so we had to wait after they got the wires all hooked up and the poles all set and everything. We had to wait for the electricity to be turned on. They promised to have it there the first part of March, and we thought they would, and we were anxious for it to be there before Floyd had to leave. He had to leave at 9 o'clock in the morning in order to be to Wayland, where the bus was going to be to take him to Fort Dix in New Jersey. And he had to leave at 9. I remember Carl Aikens took him because he didn't want to leave the car there. And it was 9 o'clock he left. At 9:30 they came and turned on the electricity. I just was so disgusted with them. And of course it was a little thing, years and years we've had electricity since, but it seemed important to us to have it and before he left so he could see how the house would look all lighted up. At first he went out of Fort Dix, he went to Fort Sumter in South Carolina. He was only there for a short time. And then they gave him what he would learn to do would be to work with small parts of a motor. And he was sent to Fort Lewis in Washington State. And that's near Mount Rainier. He had a delay en route, so he came home for a few days then. And we had a time going around visiting relatives, and the kids enjoyed all the things he could do. We went down, I remember, to his sister Juanita's in Hornell and stayed a while, and different places we went. It was a nice time. We wrote every day. I wrote him every day, and he wrote me every day. So we kept up on everything that was going on. I would write and tell him how the kids were all there. A lot of times they all came to my house, summer and winter, because it seemed to be sort of central for the Paulings and for Ward Silsby and Bob Evans and so forth. And so they'd come there and play games in the winter, play out in the yard in the summer. It's real nice, and I'd write and tell Floyd who all was there and what they were doing, and all about our pets. And we had chickens that I took eggs to Hornell and sold. That was a little means of income. Of course, I got money from the government to keep us while he was gone. We also had a cow named Edna. She was a character, you could call a cow a character. She could get out of the fence. Somehow she learned how to open we had a wire gate like that was fastened over a fence post that was supposed to keep her in, but she learned with her horns how to open up, raise up that wire and get out. She never went anywhere. She just wandered around the house and got in the woodshed and messed the wood all up and wandered around and stick her head in the doorway, back door sometimes. It was sort of comical. She'd go right back in good. She just never bothered too much. And she gave real good rich milk. I made butter from it. We had lots of cottage cheese and all the milk we wanted to use. It was good to have her, and Dick took all the care of her, and she was his cow. She didn't want anybody else to milk her or be near her. Shortly after Floyd left, Carolyn began having pains in her knees, and she would feel real bad, and I was worried over her. I couldn't think what could be the matter with her, and I took her to a doctor, and they gave her a blood test and found she had rheumatic fever and that she would have to have complete bed rest. Well, that was not hard for Carolyn because she was a very quiet girl and could play games by herself and liked to read. We kept her supplied with little books that she could read. And it wasn't a bad time at all. And we felt bad because she had to be in there, but she really got better a lot faster because she did keep so quiet. I remember the doctor explained to me, and I had already heard this from my mother, that if you keep perfectly quiet when you have some kind of an infection, the body will take over and take care of the infection. And so that was the case with her. She had to be very quiet, and she got better. We went back for blood tests periodically, and she got better. It was one day she had crawled out the window, and it was real warm outside, and she went out and sat by the big tree in our yard and played with her doll out there. And of course, I didn't know anything about it. I'd be out in the kitchen working and something, and then she crawled back in. But she forgot to bring her doll in. And she couldn't go back out because I, in the meantime, had come in. And so she just didn't say anything about it. Well, then this is one of the days that Edna got out and roamed around. And she stepped on the doll and broke her leg. And Carolyn was heartbroken, and she said she knew that God was punishing her for disobeying, and so that he allowed Edna to step on the doll's leg. She was so repentant. Of course, I never scolded her or anything. It was a natural thing for a little girl to want to be outside when it was a nice day. Carolyn had started school when she was 5. She had alone because she only went half day, and the bus would come and pick her up. I remember the day she went. I knew she was shyer than lots of kids are. And I said, well, I'll walk out to the bus with you. And she says, no, I am going by myself. And she straightened her little shoulders, and out she marched. I've thought of that so many times. Her whole life has been like that. She's always faced things that she had to face. And so, and when she got down to the Hammond house, Ellen Hammond got on. She was her age, and they became good friends. Oh, they just loved each other. They'd go back and forth for their birthdays, and sometimes their mother would let her come up and play with Carolyn, and the other way around, we'd let her go down and play with Ellen. They were real good friends, and it was a nice time for them. In fact, it's lasted all these years. Now, Carolyn has lived in Rochester for many years now, and Ellen lives up close by there, and they get together for lunch every once in a while, even yet. Dick and Jean were very good when Floyd was gone. They were very obedient and home when they were supposed to be each time. They each had chores, and they took care of them. It was very satisfying to me to have them and be there and be so helpful. We listened to the war news a while and see what. In the summer, it began to slow down, and Germany surrendered in the summer, and also Japan did in August. So the war was officially over. And of course they couldn't come home right off, but we knew Floyd would be home soon. They were keeping some men in the different areas to keep the peace afterward, but they didn't keep men with 5 children. So Floyd came home in December of that year. He wasn't gone a whole year even. But there were good things that resulted from that. He had the right to go to the Army hospitals like the one in Bath free of charge.